Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today for how Cyber GRC will evolve for 2025 and beyond. I'm Mike Andrews of Yastis, and I'm here with Karina Klever of Klever Compliance, along with our first ever guest. This is our third time doing this. We're here with Celine Coquelin, who's the co-founder of Delve, a compliance automation platform, and also an MIT grad. Hey Karina, hey Celine, how you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having us.
Likewise, awesome. Pleasure to speak with you.
Good to be here with you. So we're going to start out with some brief introductions, and then we're going to get into some questions, a little bit about baselining where we are today. It's always good to baseline that before you talk about the future. So my company is Yastis. We're in Las Vegas. We do cybersecurity risk reduction and compliance help for SMBs in the US only. And Karina, do you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm the founder of Klever Compliance. We are an industry leader in compliance management as a service and are actually tool agnostic, but provide good GRC principles and stand up any kind of regulatory framework requirements across industries, mid to large size companies on our side mostly.
Thank you. And Celine, since you're with us for the first time, we have a lot of questions about it. So we'll just ask you a few, if you don't mind, and then we'll hear more about you as we go through the topics. So can you just briefly tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction, Mike, and awesome hearing about Klever Compliance, Karina. I guess giving a bit more context about myself. Hey, everyone, I'm Celine. I grew up, born and raised in the South Bay, and in my early days, did a lot of research, working on different projects in research laboratories, doing biology, chemistry research. This eventually took me to MIT, where I continued diving deeper into this, studying AI, and really got excited by all the innovation happening in the world and wanting to build something that could impact people's lives. So while I was at MIT studying AI, I met a close friend who's now my co-founder. We got started working on different projects, really trying to make it easier for people to impact and build something that makes it out into the hands of real people. And long story short, we found our way in compliance. We're building Delve. Delve is an AI native compliance platform to automate the compliance process. We're currently working with hundreds of companies, and so it's been a fun journey, trying to make it easier for companies big and small, with or without AI, to really impact the world out there.
That's awesome. And how are things going so far?
Great. I think it's been a wild journey. I think just to trace it back, while we were at MIT, my co-founder and I studying AI, we were initially working on an AI healthcare idea, had to get HIPAA compliant for that. And so as we were going through that process, realized that it can be quite convoluted and confusing. And so we initially set out to automate the HIPAA compliance process. As that grew, folks started asking for SOC 2, so we rolled out SOC 2. Then folks started asking for ISO, GDPR, the whole alphabet soup of compliance frameworks. And so it's brought us to where we're at today. I think today things are going well. We're a fully built out AI native compliance platform, and working with a broad range of fantastic customers.
That's awesome. Checked out the platform, and really cool, great design, good information. Like that, it clearly shows the estimated timeline, so it's not some black hole of how long will this take us to do, how much effort goes into this. So really nice. So now we're going to get to the questions. We'll ask each of you. So for the first one, we'll start with you, Karina. How have you seen GRC evolve in recent years? I know you've been doing this for over 30 years, and so we'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
So started IT over 35 years ago, GRC specifically over 20 now. What I find is people are starting to catch on to the fact that you don't have to satisfy every single ethereally written, vague, nebulous statement in all of these regulations and frameworks, that it's actually really important to appropriate those controls that are out there in the ether to your actual operations. So tying in that risk management to real operations, again, instead of ethereal statements, is very important, because you want to know what will actually break or can fall apart or what's not working in your current operations. So we're seeing that evolution on the flip side. So there's pros and cons, right? Some companies kind of get it and they actually make very specific tailored GRC programs. The other companies are kind of stuck in this spin of, bringing in 70 people for 3 to 5 years and having them busily spin around in circles, trying to look for evidence that doesn't even have anything to do with their actual operations. And unfortunately, if we look at even healthcare as an example, I think over the weekend pulled the HHS OCR data breach, right? 70% of individuals in the US are actually impacted by data loss, data theft, data in healthcare organizations. And so we're doing all of these things, but I'd love to be able to see kind of a focus back on protecting that consumer data. Now the 70% is current active ongoing investigations, not ever, but there's over 260 million individuals on that report. And I think it's just a bit of a shocking state of affairs for us as an industry. And we have to kind of get back to some of the basics. And that's kind of what we encourage people to do. But yeah, there's these kind of parallel evolutions that I've been seeing. How about you guys?
Yeah, no, actually been seeing, quite similar things. I think we have to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, GRC and kind of this compliance industry is quite young, only been around for like 20, 25, 30 years. And so there's a lot of evolution that we've seen to the point where it is today in kind of its modern interpretation. And I think over the years, there's been also like a lot of, the industry has been very dynamic in terms of what compliance frameworks are people trusting? What is that expectation for security and compliance for companies based on their maturity, based on their size, based on their industry? So we've seen a lot of evolution there. One thing I find particularly interesting is SOC 2. Several years back, it was unheard of for like a very small company to be getting SOC 2. It was built for international banks. And today we're seeing 2-person companies that are going and getting SOC 2, almost immediately after incorporation. So it's been exciting to see how this industry evolves. I think Karina, like you mentioned, like at the end of the day, it's about people's trust. It's about kind of managing risk. It's about protecting consumer data. And so I feel like the compliance industry has almost been evolving to figure out how to best meet those end goals. And over the years, we've seen a lot of shifts in terms of how exactly it's achieving that. And I think especially with AI coming out, we are at another pivotal moment in the whole compliance space.
That's a good point. So, Karina, when you talk about companies that just try to speak to every control out there rather than just what applies to them, what I find over the years is that often happens because they don't really know what they should do, so they just think, oh, well, just do everything, right? We can't go wrong by if we do everything. And on the opposite end, when someone else, like say you're thinking about third-party risk, when someone else asks you a million questions, what I find was when I've helped clients or when I was in the DoD and responded in the DoD and answered those million questions, very often just the fact of submitting it in a timely manner with half competent answers got minimal response. It was almost like they were saying, oh, they responded. They must know what they're doing if they could answer all these questions in less than a month. So another thing we've just been seeing is a lot of talk about risk versus compliance. Is compliance a paperwork exercise, which we'll talk about more? So just to move on to the next question, with AI coming into the picture, how do you think GRC will evolve? If you want to start with Salim this time.
Yeah, good question. I think, to Karina's earlier point, right now we need to avoid falling into the trap of making compliance another checkbox exercise of spreadsheets, screenshots, and manual efforts that don't really, protect people and achieve that end goal of like just building trust with your customers. And I think especially with AI coming out, we're seeing AI that's making millions, like billions of decisions every second. We are seeing AI being adopted across the board, and we can't continue using spreadsheets to keep track of, how AI is regulated, how AI is keeping people's data safe. We need more robust tooling that actually, is not just there for the checkbox, but is truly there to help people stay secure and have confidence that as they're adopting AI, as they're ingesting more and more data, as they're training models in-house, that everything is staying in order and they're never losing that risk profile, which is, you know, where compliance is like what compliance is all about.
Karina, what do you think?
So I have a lot of opinions. I think that so I always think of being at a pharmaceutical company, and they have to adhere to 21 CFR, right? HIPAA compliant. One of the sections is 135, 115, which says if you make goat milk ice cream, you have to use goat milk. But the problem is the pharmaceutical company I was at never made goat milk. They made drugs people put in their mouth. There's a whole regulatory kind of QMS right on the side of that. However, because they never made goat milk ice cream, they didn't know how to acknowledge that requirement from 21 CFR and say, you know what, this doesn't apply to me, and here's why. I just don't make goat milk ice cream. So it's a little bit of a simplified example, but what I'm seeing is a lot of effort be put on too much opposed to appropriate and right-sized for that actual organization. And so if there's a possible way to govern the AI solution and put the correct parameters around it, right? Because most companies don't even have an AI policy. And, truth be told, people are out there and they're just like testing everything. They're putting in confidential information into AI solutions, right? There's actually browser extensions that are AI solutions, including ChatGPT, that are siphoning personally identifiable data from companies, from people's browsers that they use at their company sites, right? So I think we need to put a lot of controls and parameters around the use of AI. And, I love hearing that things are homegrown and, we're feeding data internally. But I still think that we need to provide realistic parameters for the end users who are using these solutions and make sure that the AI is also able to ask the right questions about, do you make goat milk ice cream? Oh, you don't make goat milk ice cream? Okay, I won't include this requirement in our control stack. So I think that's kind of an important way to really wrap our arms around the solutions that AI could provide us as an industry.
100%. And actually, to add to that point real quick, especially with new AI regulations coming out, there is a risk of, some companies falling into the trap of, slapping on another AI policy here, adding more AI controls here. And it's important to kind of just take a step back and reevaluate that, especially, EU AI Act, ISO 42001, all of these different AI regulations that are coming out. That doesn't mean to just go in and, add additional controls for the sake of satisfying these additional frameworks. It's, reevaluating risk from the ground up, given what you're using as an AI first company, and then building out your compliance program.
So the one thing I want to add on 42001 is if any of us know about QMS 9001, right? Kind of QMS standards, basic principle being, I have my recipe identified, quantity, size, ingredient. I have step one. Step two is I have my vat. I have a temperature. I spin it every so often. The container behaves a certain way or is made of a certain composition. And the output is I have a product. I have a pill. I have a refrigerator. Like if any of you have ever bought appliances, if you look on the actual boxes, many times it'll say manufactured in an ISO 9001 facility, because ISO 9001 provides us QMS, so validation, instance qualification, operational qualification, performance, IQ, OQ, PQ compiles a validated environment in the QMS. So where I'm going with this is ISO 42001 actually uses those same basic three principles. I have data that's been defined and the input is incredibly clear. My internal purpose is incredibly well defined, and my output of relevance or usage is also very specifically defined. So if we can stay in those parameters, we can call ourselves ISO 42000 with the right controls, right? You've got your definition along the way. You've got your kind of good practices, right? So ISO gives us good documentation practices, good manufacturing practices. But if we can actually identify that along the way, ISO 42001, it's been out over a year now. Great resource for folks to use.
That's good info. So with AI handling a lot more of the tasks, that allows us to allocate our time more towards quality assurance and making sure things are done right. Just looking at the continuous monitoring that the AI is doing, finding those mistakes. While at the same time, I do think more of the cyber incidents that we see and hear about, like data breaches, might be focused on AI. But if organizations are putting their data into the AI, so it'll be really important for practitioners in cybersecurity to work with the AI teams, the teams that manage the LLM, control the parameters, and then just do continuous testing over time to make sure the AI can't be tricked, right? Because if a threat actor can just talk to the AI and say, dump everything you were told, give us access to the data set, we're the ones that can fix it. We have to watch for that sort of thing, and we can't have a false sense of confidence based on like a one-time training and QA endeavor. We have to do these things over time as things evolve, because AI it can adapt, and you don't know if someone on your team changed one setting that can mess things up. So by having good quality assurance, should be good to go. And this has a lot of benefits, especially in areas like third-party risk management, where we've been relying a lot on checklists, and this could help us move more towards real-time monitoring instead. So you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Oh, yeah, I think just off the back of your last point. So funny enough, I was at MIT. I was actually part of one of the first classes to ever have that AI degree available. And one thing that's important to remember with AI is there's a lot that we still don't know. There's this whole question of mechanistic interpretability. Basically, what is happening under the hood of these AI models? And I think it's an interesting perspective where it's not just a compliance problem. It's a technical problem as much as it is compliance. And so it's the ability to bridge the two and not just, focus on the governance or kind of the risk assessments, but also do the technical due diligence of understanding what's happening underneath the hood, making sure to continually invest in what is the data you're feeding, how is, your model adapting based on the different types of inputs and outputs, and kind of, making sure you have observability into how you're leveraging AI so that you can be aware when something's happening, and always, pushing closer to that answer of, the solution to mechanistic interpretability, what is actually happening under the hood for these AI models, so we can truly govern it with 100% precision.
No, great points. And I think people in our field need just more of an understanding of AI, like most people do that don't work with it every day. Because think of a term like rogue AI. Oh, what if the AI agent goes rogue? Well, at this point, there's no AGI. It doesn't have a mind of its own. It's operating within the parameters that it was given. So if it makes a mistake, it's because that's how it was trained, and that's what the parameters allow it to do. So with that being said, in our field, we love frameworks. So what new AI frameworks should we be thinking about and preparing for this year and beyond? If you want to start with Karina, what do you think?
Why don't we start with Celine? I'm very curious because she's hitting all of the right spots.
Absolutely. So I think in terms of international AI frameworks, we're seeing a lot of new AI frameworks come out on the kind of countrywide level. So EU AI Act over in Europe, South Korea had its AI Basic Act. We're seeing a lot of different countries that are rolling out these AI regulations and frameworks, except in the US. So in the US, there really is not much of a push for that national regulation of how should we be defining AI and governing it on the national level. Instead, we're seeing individual states coming into the picture and introducing their own kind of statewide regulations. And so, we've seen regulations in a bunch of different states come out. Late last year, California had a push to get one. Texas is also in talks. There's multiple state regulations that are referencing frameworks like ISO 42001. So it's interesting. I think if you are doing business on a global level, you'll have a lot of country to country variations in terms of what frameworks to comply with. If you're in the US, you definitely need to pay more attention to what is the state by state regulation telling you. so that you can make sure that you're protecting data across the entire country. And I think just zooming out, there are all these frameworks. One interesting thing we've noticed is a lot of it resembles ISO 42001. So I think we're quite we're as a company are also quite interested in 42001 because it's almost setting an example for these different frameworks. You'll see a lot of resemblance. You'll even see in the US different state regulations explicitly reference ISO 42001. And so those are kind of the interesting points we've seen. But I think in the future, we believe ISO 42001 particularly will grow. We think there'll be more and more state level regulations coming out, and we'll see different countries kind of take influence from each other and continue adapting, continue rolling out AI frameworks. And it's going to kind of change the landscape. I think SOC 2, its role might change. HIPAA, GDPR, these different regulations, their role is going to change relative to the AI regulations we'll have in the up and coming years.
Karina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that what I'd love to see is some of the state-specific consumer privacy laws, not AI laws. Consumer privacy laws actually provide some guidance. That it's funny, we all look at regulations and frameworks as they have to be prescriptive to us, right? And even NIST v2 on the abstract on page 2, it says this is not a prescriptive document. This is only a recommendation. This is supposed to be applicable across industries and sizes and maturities of companies, right? Various companies. And so we always look at these very at regulations, especially not frameworks like NIST, but regulations like laws. We try to look at them as these very prescriptive requirements, but the people that are writing those are writing them broadly because they want them to be broadly applicable. So we tag on to these broad words and make really big deals of them instead of just kind of stopping and acknowledging them and saying, here's how this relates to my company specifically, and here's how I'm going to do the required compensating control to satisfy that requirement. And so although, yes, we have a lot of requirements from a state level, there's over 120 countries that have consumer privacy laws globally, right? So we do have laws out there looking out for the consumer, which is fantastic. What we're kind of missing are those company-specific policies that say dear end user. The security awareness policies that were written as a kind of behind the scenes kind of paragraph inside the employee handbook that you sign once when you show up 15 years ago, they're not addressing social media. They're not addressing AI usage. They're not addressing some of the critical, you're going to use the company phone to take pictures of babies and puppies. And then when you get termed and they wipe your phone, you can't take me to court because now you have stress because, we wiped your pictures of babies and puppies. Right. So there's all of these new technology considerations that companies really have to make the decision to provide guidance to their workers, whether they're employees or subcontractors or vendors, about expected data handling principles within the technology stack that company is providing those end users. And one of those items in that technology stack is the use of AI, and that needs to be very critically defined.
Oh, really good points. So I think AI frameworks will do well based on peer accountability and the way the countries and laws and maybe sectors are demanding it, right? Because no company wakes up and says, I really feel like focusing on cybersecurity today. They do it because their clients, partners, laws, regulations, and standards call for it. And if they don't do it, something can go wrong. And I think looking at it the same way in AI is a fair way to do that, because if a company is evaluating a few different AI products and they just don't see anything about AI governance in the response from 2 of them, then that makes the one that is doing AI governance, puts them at an advantage, which then that'll feed back and probably make those 2 other companies say, hey, we really wanted that contract. And if we got that contract, it would have paid for all the AI effort as far as securing it. And then lesson learned, let's do this stuff. And before you know it, things get better over time. So anything to add before we move to the next one?
Definitely. I think I 100% agree with you. I think we, even working with companies today that are selling, trying to close those big contracts, a year ago, you wouldn't see any AI related questions. I think now we're seeing AI questions. We're seeing, do you have an AI policy? What is your risk management? What AI endpoints are you using? A lot of very AI specific questions in those IT security reviews. And, these are, in a day and age where there is no kind of super hyper prevalent AI framework out there. And so it's more so coming from top down in terms of what are the enterprises and the big companies of the world mandating from their customers. Those customers are having to get it. It's a trickle down effect. And it's just becoming more and more prevalent where these IT security questionnaires and these other, vendor procurement processes that companies are having to go through are touching more and more heavily on their AI standing.
I completely agree. The next one. So we talk a lot about checkbox compliance. The graphic for this webinar showed the train hitting the bus, showing that adaptive compliance is better than just checkbox compliance. But how do each of you think about checkbox compliance? If I want to start with you, Karina, if you could tell us something maybe that might be good, and then maybe something that's not so good about it.
So what's good about it? It forces you to think about your scope of GRC in your company. So if you use it as a checklist, you kind of can say, well, this is prompting some thought on a decision I have to make, and then you can decide whether or not it's really applicable to you. A lot of the 12, 7,000, 23,000 row checklists are literally the equivalent of you've got 7 things on your list for tonight's recipe. You go to the grocery store. Well, first you take a rocket to the grocery store down the street, right? And all that's involved there. You show up at the grocery store and then you buy one of every single thing in the grocery store, one of every frozen, one of every produce, one of every box, one of every can, one of every meat. You haul everything home. You try to figure out where you're going to store everything, only to get those 12 things on your recipe list for tonight's dinner. This is what we're doing. A lot of us are doing exactly this. We take the entirety of that grocery store, we bring it home, only to get 12 things for tonight's dinner. So that exercise has to happen. That checkbox compliance has to happen outside of bringing that all into our companies. There has to be a decision point that sits outside of our actual GRC program where we pick and choose the things that apply to us. We have a thing called N to the 4th, now, next, near, never. We take the entirety of that spreadsheet and we say, are we doing this now? Are we doing this next? Are we doing it near? Is it on a strategy? Or is it never goat milk, right? So we actually figure out how to do that appropriation. I want to say a really quick word. So checkbox compliance, great to use as a reference. Please don't adopt all of it because you're creating unnecessary busy work for your users who are going to run around looking for evidence that doesn't even exist. The one thing I really want to say about vendor management programs that require that checkbox for SOC 2s, the SOC 2 landscape is changing drastically because there are just so many easy ways. I mean, I've got friends who would do, $100,000 cost to get all of the 5 trust principles for an environment. Now you can get all 5 trust principles with a few check boxes for 10 grand, right? You never see an auditor there. I mean, it's just, it's a completely watered down landscape. The partners that are involved will sometimes just like sign off on stuff, right? I mean, it's a very changing landscape. It's becoming watered down. My one huge word of caution, our biggest risk area right now in this industry is vendor management. Just because you received a SOC 2 from your vendor, read it. Actually, just read it towards the top. It says subservice organizations are excluded from this report. So when your vendor takes your data and passes it on to their vendors, there's zero liability, there's zero depth, there's zero understanding of what happens to your data. And then their privacy policy says, we're not responsible for your data. You shouldn't be putting anything confidential in there anyway, even though you've hired this vendor to do confidential processing. So please keep that in mind when you're kind of thinking about checkbox compliance. Governance is created for you to apply to your company. And everything else up here, all of those checkboxes and points and references and frameworks, and those are all just intended to just be guidance for you to establish your own governance program.
100%. I think very well said. I think compliance is ultimately a top-down. It's, what is the risk profile of your company? What are the things that are going to help you build trust with your customers, and then work backwards to figure out exactly what controls, what frameworks you want to adopt, what practices you want to follow within your company. And a checklist is almost, just an easy way to get that done. Puts it very clean and simple in terms of what needs to be get done. But I think what you're pointing out is, checkbox compliance might get you there, but you might also be making your life harder. There might be an easier way by customizing your compliance, customizing your controls, adapting your, entire a GRC program to better achieve this end goal, which is the risk that your company holds and your relationship with your customers. And so I completely agree with you there. I think there's a lot of, part of it comes from almost a knowledge gap. I think there's a lot of changes that happen in GRC fast, a lot of advancements in technology, a lot of day-to-day events. And the thing about GRC is, you have to stay up to date with the latest. And so checkbox compliance has almost been, adopted as hey, here's what other companies are doing. Hey, here's what's standard. Let me just adopt it. But I think being able to customize that to your company, the exact services you're offering, is really what the direction that's going to head in. And, part of it's going to come with fixing this knowledge gap. I think sometimes when people are like, hey, I'm going to start using ChatGPT at this company, people don't know how they should respond. Some companies are more open, some are more like, hey, let's not make sure data leaves the premises of, our intranet. So there's a lot of questions up in the air. Checkbox compliance is one way that people are solving it. But I think as we get better and better answers, and as we resolve this knowledge gap, we're ultimately going to realize that there's a much easier way to do it. And it's by sitting down, understanding what you do as a company first, and then building out a compliance program custom to that, in kind of a world where every company has their own custom compliance program and people aren't using standardized checklist. Everything is, custom to them.
That's good information. Really well said. I think we just can't look at these questionnaires, these checklists, as if it's going to do 100% of the job. We know that it's the case in other areas of life. When you're thinking about finding, someone to be in a relationship with, you might have your own little checklist. You might say, oh, I'd like them to be this tall, or have a good job, or I'd like them to have these hobbies, or treat me this way. But we can't just put our questionnaire on Tinder or something like that, for example, and say, hey, fill this out, self-qualify yourself, do this work for me. It sounds that crazy in this example, and really it's that crazy in our own field to think that things are going to go well if you just rely on a checklist. So moving on to the next one. So every company is different. We have different sectors, sizes, geographical locations, which call for doing things in a different way. So how do you think a company should tailor their cyber GRC efforts based on their maturity, industry, and size? We'll start with you, Karina.
It's basically what I was saying, into the fourth on our side, right? So we will not look at the platforms that they have. We will not look do you have a GRC platform or not? Do you have an incident management platform or not? What are you doing for vulnerability management? All those functional operations, right? How much integration do you have? We don't look at that at all. What we do is we take the input for the company based on who they are. Are they HIPAA compliant? Do they have to be GLBA, FFIEC? Do they have credit card data? Do they have consumer data, right? So whatever that company is doing We call those influences, the influences in that influence their company operations, those regulations and frameworks. And we basically just, it's kind of boring. We sit down at a table and most conference rooms look the same nationally. Parking lots look the same nationally. I pull into a client site and we sit down at a table, and sometimes we order food, and some clients want to pray. I mean, whatever they want to do. And we go through those influences and we decide what applies to them specifically. And we put those ethereal, nebulous, vague statements that are written for everybody broadly. We take those and we put them into those buckets. Are we doing this now? Let's write the documentation, right? Let's make sure we're gathering the evidence. Is it failing? Let's create that risk. Risk is so important in actually managing your actual operations. What's failing in my actual real true operations? Not is there going to be an earthquake in LA? Sure, we want to prepare for that, right? DRBCP. But what in my operations is actually breaking? GRC is what provides that governance, right? And so once we do that, now we can actually have a very clear definition of our current operations. And then we make that documentation stack tool specific for whatever platform you're using. We are in such a tool heavy industry. If you can please at all help it for any of those that are in the incident management space, please stop asking your folks to swivel chair between 3, 5, 7 platforms, because it makes it very, very hard for them to, we can't fill positions right now because we want tool specific knowledge instead of teaching our folks and growing them up and making their jobs easier for them to work off of one platform. We've got all of these platforms, and then each one of those platforms sends the guy an email or the girl an email. Now we've got like 7 different entry points for the same one point of work. And we are surprised at how people are like burned out. Well, of course, we're making it impossible for them to focus their attention. So all of these things considered, who you are at a company, who influences you, ultimately which tool stack you use, and how you're providing that continuity of operations is incredibly important.
What do you have to add, Celine?
Yeah, I think compliance, exactly like you said, Karina, it's not one size fits all. And I think the real issues, the real vulnerabilities come when you try to adapt this one compliance program to a 2-person startup that, incorporated a year ago, all the way up to the big, enterprises of the world. And I think there's kind of this push to always make your compliance program more robust, more, comprehensive. And I think sometimes that over-engineers the program and almost hinders you as a company. I think the best sign of a compliance program is that it's customized to the stage, the maturity, the industry, and kind of the other, like the technological complexity of a company. And when you try to introduce something that's way over engineered for a 10-person company, or try to introduce a program that's maybe doesn't have the right like checks and balances in place for a very large enterprise, you put yourself in additional risk beyond just what you'd expect. And so it's definitely not linear. There's a lot of nuances here, but I think at the end of the day, this whole it's kind of a multivariable formula where you have a bunch of different parameters to balance, and it's about how you go top down from that risk profile.
Oh, that's good info. I think it's important to figure out what risks you have, figure out your compliance requirements, but also to leverage the tools within the platforms that most of these companies are using. Like a lot of SMBs use like Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, and they have a ton of tools in there. And I'll be working with clients, and they'll say, "Oh, well, we're thinking of buying this," and I'll say, "Why don't you just use the one that's right there in the platform? Just use what you already have." And just be efficient with it. You don't have to do a heavier lift than needed, and then just automate whatever possible. Moving on, since we're a little bit behind, but we'll get there. So how should a company balance their cyber risk management and their compliance efforts? If you want to start with you, Celine.
Yeah, I think the two are very closely interlinked. I think that risk management and compliance should be working hand in hand. Ultimately comes down to you as a company. What are the services you're providing? What are your customers wanting from you? And then building out a compliance profile around that. I think when you do one independent of the other, that's where kind of these more weak compliance programs come from. I think don't build compliance for the sake of compliance. Understand why you're doing what you're doing, and don't just quantify your risks without properly implementing the compliance controls to mitigate them.
Karina, what do you think?
And I'm going to second that. I think that's exactly right. So I think we have to get in the practice of risk management. Look, we used to have 35 years ago when I was working with punch cards and tape mounts, folks, a concept called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, right? And so we can have all of the beautiful tools in the world, and I think some of them are absolutely amazing. But if the data we put in there is useless, it's going to give you useless results. So we have to just be really careful with doing that risk management from not only that ethereal risk statement, the earthquake in LA, the tornado in Kansas, these things happen. We just went through the wildfires, right? I wrote an article that was published in CDM magazine, Cyber Defense magazine, about the experiences in some companies being unable to recover from the LA wildfires. So yes, we want to prepare for those ethereal things, but we really want to be able to tag on to our real, true operational failures, which can only be determined when the controls are specific to our real true operations. So when a control fails, you log that into your risk registry, and now you can start mitigating that and managing the resolution to that from that, whether it's a platform, like whatever is working for your company.
No, that's well said. So a simple way I kind of look at this is you do, then you demonstrate. So you find the risks, you deal with the risks, and then you start tackling the compliance stuff. Because if you didn't deal with those risks first, you're going to have blind spots if you just jump right towards trying to comply without prioritizing the risk. Because something that might seem like a big risk initially because maybe someone heard it in the news may not apply at your company. So do, then demonstrate. Moving on to the next one here, we have how can small and medium-sized businesses adapt to relevant laws, regulations, and frameworks while minimizing business friction? Because a cyber GRC team can't just say, do these 100 things. The business has to think about their products, services, customer services, and growth. So we'll start with you, Karina. What do you think?
Can I pass this one over to Celine, because I think she's got a lot of great solutions and ideas for that one.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, first of all, it's the ethos of your company. I think, if you're going to decide that you want to get a product into the hands of people, first considering compliance and, considering your risk profile is 100% first step in the right direction. From there, I think it comes down to working with something that, platform, a vendor, a solution that understands and knows your, risk appetite, that knows your risk profile of a company at your stage, that knows kind of what would be over-engineered for you and what's about, the right balance of, compliance complexity at your stage. And so I think the real problem is when you try to introduce, hundreds and hundreds of controls to a very small company, that hinders them and, distracts their focus away from actually building something that is going to make it into the hands of people, versus taking a step back based on what that company is building, working with a vendor that knows kind of the average risks that we see in like companies at that stage, or kind of based on what that company is trying to do, building out a compliance program custom to them actually lets them grow way faster. And I think it's kind of against the common idea that, people see compliance as like, make sure you're not moving too fast and managing risk. But I actually think compliance can be used something to completely speed you up as a company, close bigger customers, reach more company milestones, just scale faster. And I think a compliance program done right achieves that.
Yes, because when you're not bogged down with noise, it'll actually make you more efficient. The one thing I want to kind of add, so Klever Compliance, we do this thing called compliance management as a service. Smaller companies especially have no idea what all those templates say. This is where we turn dangerous and we just go, yes, 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 yes. Just recently, Mike knows the situation. There was a 50-year-old family-run business who was run, by the family, and they needed to get CMMC compliant. The sister/daughter who was running the front office just marked a whole bunch of yeses. And then one of the vendors said, well, show me proof that you're CMMC compliant. She didn't even know what that was. They ended up closing the business down. Incredibly tragic, because they lost this capability to continue their company, right, that their father started. So my point to this is an urge to business owners, if they're small, please don't just say yes, yes, yes to everything, right? This is the equivalent of taking the rocket to the grocery store and bringing back one of every single thing at the store. Pick up the phone and call somebody. Call for a referral. Compliance does not have to be isolated to an attorney that you pay a bunch of money to, right? Compliance can be somebody like our company, your company, Mike's company, right? There are a lot of professionals out there who offer even partial support for standing up a compliance program. It doesn't mean you have to hire somebody really expensive full-time to internally be there for something that you probably think just pushes paper, right? Which is not the case when a GRC program is done right. It completely optimizes your operations. So, and it gives you a really great purview onto how all of the functions in your company. GRC is not an IT thing. There are feeds in from HR, from legal, from finance, right? So to have that entire scope within your company, just a fantastic capability that you want to give yourself as you're growing your company. It will make it more robust, but you don't have to do it yourself, and you don't have to blindly hit yes on stuff, because you might just be a technologist. Maybe you grew up in technology and there's nothing wrong with that. Now you own a company. Now you're a CISO. Doesn't mean you have to know what compliance is. Right? So call somebody for help, I guess is all I'm saying, because that might be better in the long run.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really important to just know what applies to your company. Tie everything to the return on investment that you'll get. Like if you're a business leader, you don't need to be super technical to go to your IT person, or your cybersecurity, or even if you're talking to a SaaS company like Delve, and then just say, I mainly want to do this. I want to see some high ROI ideas, present them to me, and then also just, you don't have to know this stuff yourself. You just either work with experts or just work with SaaS tools, or a combination of both. Because if the cyber ROI is right, the math will work itself out, and it'll end up making sense for the business. Moving on to the next question here. How can a company automate their GRC using AI-driven tools? We'll start with Celine, since I heard MIT is a good place for this sort of thing. And
yeah, not a bad place for AI.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think when it comes to compliance, there's a lot of compliance that's evolved over the years. A lot of the way compliance is actually run is still requires a good amount of manual heavy lifting. And I think there's more and more solutions out there that are trying to slowly automate this. But I think at Dell, what we've done is we've kind of rethought compliance from the ground up and taken a step back and tried to build out this AI native compliance platform that helps you achieve those different compliance tasks with proper AI security in place, and with tools that are meaningfully going to improve your compliance program. And so when it comes to kind of adopting AI, I think from a compliance perspective, there's a lot of manual time savings to be won of just manually searching through logs. There's AI tools that can help you search through logs and find incidents you wouldn't be able to mark down, or whether it's going through access control reviews. Better than you manually logging into these different portals, your internal tooling, your third-party vendors. There's AI that can go in, spin up agents that go in, cross-correlate, flag things, create JIRA tickets. And so that's kind of our vision at Delve in terms of what we've built out, what we have customers kind of working on it. And I think at the end of the day, you can continue to operate compliance as it is. But with AI coming out, I mean, we're having AI models that are making thousands, millions of decisions a second, and we need AI to regulate AI if we really want to protect our risk profile. And so Delve is, what we're building is that like platform that actually gives you that meaningful security, that actually helps you make time savings, obviously without cutting corners, and kind of backed by the latest cutting edge research. I mean, our team is MIT, Stanford, Berkeley AI researchers. And so I think there's a lot to bridge here in terms of connecting the technology, the AI, to compliance, and Delve sits right in the middle.
So, Karina, do you have anything to add? And as a practitioner, what type of ways would you want to use AI, but maybe you haven't yet?
There's a glue that's missing. So the glue that's missing is not only is it top down, it's bottom up. It's that meeting in the middle, right? So the glue that's missing is there are a bunch of IT functions on all kinds of different platforms that are incredibly effective. Some companies have so many of these platforms, they don't think about how a lot of the source data is coming from the same spot. There might be different UIs, but so there's a lot of service offerings that are available for companies that they leverage. There might be project management platforms, there might be financial platforms, there might be SAP platforms, there might be technology enabler platforms, right? The glue that seems to be missing is that, on one hand, the influence, that regulation and framework that you may or may not have to adhere to, and isolating those specific controls to the functions that are already happening and meeting them in the middle, and kind of having those functions show satisfaction to those specific requirements in those regulations and frameworks that apply to them. So that glue that continues to be missed is, I can write an incident management policy. Okay, sure, a lot of people can, right? But where in that incident management policy process, procedure, standard, template, knowledge base? Yes, write it on a napkin, write it somewhere, right? Where is it saying in that document that by doing these things, I'm satisfying the regulation and frameworks that I'm influenced by at my company? So that magical knot is where we need to hyper focus all of our efforts in AI, in integration, in automation, in workflow definition. A lot of the workflows aren't even defined, right? So to define the input and define the capabilities and how that helps companies is really going to be that sweet spot for long-term viability.
That's good information. So if the AI can automate a lot of stuff, then that allows us to focus on making sure it's properly customized and doing quality assurance so we have no blind spots. So what do you think are some good ways that we can make sure it's properly customized and we have no blind spots? We'll start with you, Celine.
Yeah, good question. I think when it comes to AI, I think part of it is making sure that you're using AI to accelerate your current workflow and do the things that you can't do, and fix the blind spots that you'd otherwise be missing. And so I think one thing in particular that AI allows for is this sort of concept of compliance on demand. Right now, because we're relying on last quarter's access control review, or whether we're relying on a screenshot of EBS volume encryption from last month, we kind of lose visibility into in the here and now. At this very given moment, are we in compliance or are we out of compliance? And if we're out, we need to go do something about it. And so one of the things that AI allows for is to just be able to tell you, in this very given moment, are you in compliance or not? And it does that by doing the hard work that Karina, you just mentioned, of interpreting and making sense of all the data that's being ingested and created at a company. It's not just, can I pull the logs? It's not just, can I write up the policies? It's being able to make sense of the policy. Does this policy align with your last incident and how you kind of documented that incident? is the interpretation layer of all of the evidence you're gathering there. And I think unlocking that interpretation layer is what gives companies visibility into, in this very given moment, are we compliant or not? And kind of moving away from relying on screenshots that we're having highly paid GRC, senior GRC folks take every month and, spend hours just kind of manually going through. There's a lot of ways that, AI will really take this forward and make sure that we're setting the right automations to keep companies secure without compromising on risk at all, but instead fixing all the blind spots that we as humans would otherwise miss.
That's good info. What do you think, Karina?
I say yes, please. So yes, so of course we want to make sure to define the inputs and then automate them as much as possible, and this could be a really great solution for that.
Exactly right, and that's where that happens. Some subject matter expertise comes in, even if it's for just like QA checks once in a while. It never hurts to have another set of eyes look at it, and also just to keep in mind that we need to refine this stuff over time, make sure things are working well, focus on continuous improvement, things of that nature. So getting to the last question here, we've talked about how things are today, how things will be in the future, but let's talk about what we can do about it. Let's be actionable. It's Wednesday. So to start with you, Karina, how can Klever Compliance help with this stuff in the next 2 or 3 years?
So I kind of hone in always on the basics because we're getting some of the basic principles wrong. Number one, know where your data is. Classify it. So do not encrypt publicly available data. Why? Get rid of it. 2 weeks. You don't need it. You don't need to hold on to it for 78 years. You just don't, right? So classify that data, know where it is. And when you map out the, do I know where it is? Include your vendors and understand the liabilities that they have to your data, not only for their own internal processes, but downstream. Remember NIST V2, data transportation, processing, and storage. Make sure that you cover all those three and you know what data you're gathering and where it's going. The other components are all coming off of data classification, access controls. Who has access to what data? The important people need to have access to the important data, but not everybody else, right? Privileged users, access control, right? Role-based access control. Never say, well, just go ahead, Karina started. What, you should go ahead and clone Mike's access. It needs to be role-based because then you can track exceptions from there for any elevated privileges, right? So we're talking data, access, backup, DRBCP, incident. Which incident am I going to pay attention to first? Based on the data. If I don't know what data I have 10 servers that are down. Which one do I really care about? Or do we all run around panic like a chicken without a head? Right? Passive evidence gathering long-term so that you're not running around gathering that evidence. So all of these very vendor management programs, risk management programs, I mean, the list goes on and on, folks. So again, Klever Compliance comes in and really from a tool agnostic perspective looks at the operations of their current GRC and has the decision makers make decisions, which will then influence and better optimize the downstream processes and functions in that company. And then we can also help gathering that evidence long-term once that GRC program. We have a brilliant team full of cybersecurity engineers who work with our clients to make sure that that evidence is gathered, make sure that that risk is being mitigated, make sure that those project plans are being executed against audit findings, against projections, against all of these kinds of things. So that's kind of what we do. And we run RFPs all the time, RFQs for companies who can decide on capabilities that they need really for their own functions. So that's where we're at. Sorry, I went too long. Go ahead.
Thanks. So Lynn, we talked about the Dell platform a little bit, but if you could tell us, how can the platform help companies save time and money? Like, do you have any estimates on that?
Definitely. So in compliance, there is a monumental shift happening where with AI coming in, the way compliance runs is not going to be the same as it is being run today. And we're already seeing that shift with some of these big, leading companies that are using AI to completely change the way they run their GRC programs. And we're in the future, we're not going to be relying on screenshots taken, last quarter. We're not going to rely on kind of a human sitting down, sifting through policies, and trying to kind of manually map out how should they be responding to different incidents. We can't afford that sort of margin for error and that sort of human error in the age of AI. And so what Delve is that it's this AI native compliance platform that's going to let people completely change the way their GRC platform runs by giving them visibility into, in this very given moment, are you in or out of compliance, and do you manage your compliance and your risk profile with things that you're manually finding as a human, or with things you're manually finding as a human, further accelerated by AI and additional tools to make sure you're not missing any blind spots. So that's kind of the vision there. In terms of how companies are using this, I think there's time and cost savings across the board. You're instead of having some highly paid senior GRC person who's going in and taking screenshots every month, it's a agent that's going in collecting the evidence, and instead of leaving it to the CISO to make sense of the evidence, it's this interpretation layer that's already being able to find mismatches between this pen test and another pen test you got from another firm before the auditors flag it for you. So there's a lot of efficiency and kind of quality of life improvements that are going to come with this, and especially with the change in how GRC programs are going to be run in 1 to 5 years from now, with new AI frameworks coming in, with new standards for how AI should be utilized. You're going to need a compliance platform that understands the AI technology and kind of the compliance and can bridge them. And so that's right where Delve sits.
Oh, thanks for that. At our company, Yastis, we focus on doing risk assessments and gap analysis so you can find the risk, find where any shortfalls in terms of compliance, and then we take steps to just improve everything, right, to reduce the risk. And we do that by applying admin, technical, and physical security controls, and just help with strategy, things of that nature. We use automation whenever possible, and we help our clients do the same, and that's what we do. So thank you for going over this. Karina, quickly, did you see any audience questions? If you want to bring up one or two, or should we just close out?
I think we're over time, so we should close out. I think our contact info is all on the webinar. So if anyone has any questions, please reach out.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you all. And when you get so excited about the conversation, time flew. So I didn't realize we were over time, but fantastic speaking with both of you. And do not hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, so if you do have questions, make sure to put it in the comments, because we do go back and we will make sure to answer every single question you have, no matter what it is. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sure you're all very busy. Thank you, Celine, for joining us as our first guest. It was awesome. You set a high bar for guests. We will be announcing the April webinar soon. It'll be on the 23rd of April. We have a great guest who's absolutely killing it on LinkedIn. More to come soon. And thanks, everyone. And have a fantastic day.
Have a great Wednesday, everyone. Take care. Bye, all.
Bye. See you.
Bye.
Bye.